Hello, Augies worldwide, and welcome to another episode of Ask Dave. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, and we're going to look at some Ask Dave questions that we get. You can submit a question to hamradioanswers at gmail.com, and Trevor here is our Ask Dave editor, and he is the one who collects and collates these.
LCSC Electronics is now a sponsor of this channel. LCSC Electronics is an international distributor of electronics parts and is a circuit board manufacturer. Please check out their websites at lcsc.com and easyeda.com.
Dennis asks how often he needs to replace his coax that's been exposed to the elements.
Well, coax does pretty good in the sun and outside. Some people recommend different intervals for it. I would say as long as there are no cracks in it where water can get in, if animals haven't chewed on it, you're doing fine. If the coax or if the SWR starts to look weird, one way of looking at this is if your coax, if you're getting a lower SWR all of a sudden, it could be because your coax is soaking up some of the RF energy, which could happen if it gets wet inside. So there's no fixed period of time, but every 3 to 4 years, give your coax a close inspection and see if it's doing okay. And it probably will do okay for several years.
Joe, call sign KEOSTP, is wondering about antenna mast separation and coax selection.
Okay. Putting up a 24-foot mast, which will have a J-pole for his IC7100 and a diamond D134 SDR, software-defined radio, I guess. I will have about 30 feet from the antennas to lightning arresters and then 15 to 20 feet from the radio. What coax should I use? Do I use the same all the way to the radio? Also, how do I need to separate the antennas on the mast? Horizontal, vertically? Vertically, usually, with the antenna, the smaller antenna up on top. The J-pole is unidirectional. I'm not sure about the Diamond D130. I'm not familiar with that antenna. 30 feet, I would suggest RG8X as a minimum, or you could put in RG213 from the antenna to the lightning arresters into the shack, and you could go straight from there to your IC7100 with the 213. That's pretty heavy coax, so you might want to make a little jumper at the end that's RG8X, which is a lot easier to deal with in the shack. Okay, good luck with getting your shack all set up.
Earl, call sign KI6BAC, is wondering about an antenna recommendation for HF.
Well, there's lots out there. 1 acre with several tall ponderosa pines and fir trees. Okay. Well, you could do loops. There are some multi-band loop antenna designs in the handbook and in the ARRL antenna book. Loops, a Moxon antenna, curtain antennas. These are wire antennas that take advantage of the height of your trees. I mean, even just a dipole. But yeah, take advantage of those trees and get some antennas up high, even if just a dipole. One of the nice things about, say, a delta loop is you only need one really high point, and then you can pull the wires out away from it at the bottom, sort of like an inverted V, but it's got a connection across the bottom. That's a very popular antenna for people who have tall trees like you do. So you've got lots of options there with those tall trees. I wish I had tall trees. I don't.
John, call sign KG5KYJ, would like your advice on a suburban antenna installation.
Told to lead a antenna installation for a blind club member at his new house. Looking at grounding and things like that, and soil conductivity tests, and oh my goodness, that is a lot of work. Hams don't normally have to do that kind of work. This guy's house has a 20-foot mast with a 17 plus VHF UHF Comet antenna on the top. Electrical service. Could you please tell me what a basic outline for generic house setup would look like, including wire sizes, numbers of rods, where to bond them if there is no outside ground rod below a meter box? Can you just simply tell me what is actually required for us suburban hams with radios in the house? And he wants to try his G5RV Junior in his attic too. How do you ground that? It's becoming a nightmare. It is because you're trying to ground it as though it is a commercial radio station. You don't have to be that exotic. Here's a good recommendation, and again, this is not a safety briefing, so although I'm an engineer, I'm not an electrician. You may wish to consult with an electrician. But wherever his shack is, look for the entry point of the antenna wires, going down into the crawl space or something like that. And that's where you want to put your radio station ground, usually a single 8-foot ground rod. And you can put onto that the lightning arresters. And then you'd run the antenna like that G5RV Junior would be grounded at that rod with the antenna surge protector. And then you go from there into the house to the radio. And then you would do the same with the Comet antenna, bring it down to that same place, put in another lightning arrestor for it, and take it into the house. Okay? Now, there should be in the radio room a single point ground. It can be as simple as a short piece of copper pipe that all the grounds in the shack go to. There may be only one or two if you're just starting out. And then from that you run a number 6 wire down to your ground rod, number 8 if you can't find number 6. Number 6 is kind of what people like to use. If there is a ground rod at the utility entrance, you want to run a wire, a number 6 wire, from the station ground over to the utility ground. And don't make it fancier than you need to make it. If you start following all of these commercial guidelines to the last letter of the law, you're going to be putting in extremely sophisticated ground systems with extraordinary expense, and it's just not needed for something like this. In a commercial radio facility, it has to keep working through lightning. They lose lots of money if the thing goes down because of a lightning strike. That's not the case with amateur radio. I mean, we try to protect our equipment, but we don't lose millions of dollars a day if something goes down. So keep it reasonable. I've got a video on grounding that talks a little bit about these requirements. The only difference I would state from the video is use number 6 instead of number 8 wire if you can. All right.
All right. Rodney, call sign KEOPHS, is wondering about his dipole antenna placement.
Tell you right off the top of my head, higher is better. Let's see. Setting up HF base station, wondering about a dipole placement. Center mass limited on the free ends. Is there a significant negative impact if the dipoles for separate bands are layered on the same masts? What would be the optimum spacing between the dipoles? If you're layering them on the same mast, it means they're running parallel to each other. And if they're running parallel to each other, they will affect each other. This is a common situation where you would feed all the dipoles at the same time from one feed point, and then if you have like your 40 meter this way, you could have your 30 meter drooped a little bit, and so on. The problem with putting those dipoles together is they affect each other. And they are a bear to tune, because if you change one, you can change all the rest too. There are commercially available antennas that do this. The other answer would be to go for a multiband dipole with traps. For what you're doing, I wouldn't worry too much about trap loss. And then you only have to put one antenna up there and it works on multiple bands. MFJ sells antennas like that. DX Engineering has several, and so on. So there are things you can do.
All right, Jamie, call sign 4X5JG, is wondering about his G5RV Junior roof build.
G5RV and a roof. Building his first antenna. G5RV Junior type dipole. Be an inverted V, fine. Since I also have an active antenna type ARA60 from Dressler, Germany, which would be attached to the input of an Eddystone 958 receiver, not something I'm familiar with. And I want to raise this active antenna as high as possible on the mast. The mast support is made by a 6-meter tall bamboo cane. That's a pretty tall piece of bamboo. That's about 20 feet. The case is that another ham said to me that attaching the AR60 with the mast could be dangerous to the active antenna during the transmissions from my dipole. The answer is yes, it could. You want to separate the two as far as possible. Now you have a null on the, I'm assuming this is a loop for your receive antenna. There's a null in the middle. Point that null at the other antenna if you can. Thinking to use a relay that will disconnect the DC power to the ARA60 and maybe else in the same time to connect the ARA60 inputs to the chassis. If you could do it right at the antenna, the problem is the power amplifier, that's the little amplifier that's out at the antenna, is connected to the antenna even when there's no power provided. So you run the risk of overloading that front end even though the thing is turned off. So if you're going to do a relay type of thing, what you want to do is disconnect that antenna and ground it. And then short out the inputs to those antennas so that you can protect them. That'd be kind of sophisticated because that relay has to come down pretty close. Now I have a somewhat similar situation in my yard. I've got a couple transmitting antennas, 3 transmitting antennas, and then kind of in the middle of all that is my MFJ receive-only antenna that I use for my software-defined radio. And I've not had a problem with it. The null is pointed kind of outward, sort of away from the other antennas. Seems to work okay.
All right, Tyler, call sign KL2SB, is wondering about his 40-meter antenna gain.
Trying to figure out a good option for some gain of 40 meters antenna. A phased array of, I'm not sure what C-type are. Would it improve reception? It can. Could this be accomplished by definitely putting up several verticals is not a mere kind of thing. Yes, it can. You have to phase them right. If you put up 4 vertical antennas in a square like this, and you phase them properly, you can cover quadrants, any of 4 quadrants from those, depending on how they're phased. And they do fairly well, actually, that way. I've got a former work colleague who set something like that up. And you use a switch to turn between the 4 positions, so you get some directivity out of them, some front-to-back ratio, and some gain. Phased array of that type, well, there's the classic, let's see, what do you call it? It's not a ZEP. Collinear antennas. The collinear antenna, by the way, spelled with two L's, is two dipoles kind of in series fed by a J-pole type feed, which of course would be quite large on 40 meters. That would work, however, it would be about 130 feet long, and it would need to be about 65 feet or so in the air to have a good output. That will give you some gain also if you can only go in a straight line. So lots of options there. Good luck. You're in for some work. Look at the antenna book, the ARRL antenna book carefully for that. It can be done.
Call sign KC3SCZ would also like an HF antenna recommendation.
I'd like to, my name is Don. I'd like to ask about a small yard antenna. I not have room for a antenna. I'm looking for an antenna I can put up for HF bands. If you have a small yard, you want to look at a multiband vertical. And since it's a small yard and you won't be able to put out long radials, you want to look for one of the electrical half-wave antennas. One that's really popular these days is the, I think it's Cushcraft AV640. I don't think that's high gain. It's either high gain or Cushcraft. AV640. These multiband vertical antennas are not cheap. You're looking at paying $400 to $500, maybe a little bit more for one of these antennas. And they come in a million parts, and so you've got to assemble the whole thing. People I've talked to who have the AV640 like it. I have a vertical antenna, but it requires radials, and boy does it require radials. I've got quite a few radials out there now, and the antenna works pretty well. But that's what I do, because those don't require ground radials. They have a sort of a built-in counterpoise that they can work against, and they work quite well.
All right, Spencer called sign VK2SPB. Is wondering about the balun in an MFJ folded dipole.
I have a question about a balun folded dipole for 40 meters. It has what I presume to be a 4-to-1 voltage balun. It matches the coefficient, the high impedance, uses antenna, 150 watts. Now uses 55 watts on FT8. MFJ says it's only rated for 100 watts, so I wonder if I've damaged it. I'm putting 150 watts through it. I doubt it. On rainy days, the SWR is 2-to-1. Dry days, 1.5-to-1. Not sure where the moisture is getting in. It's not necessarily getting in. It's you get different radiation patterns when it's raining. Sealed with coaxial. Recall from my electronics training that baluns are built from ferrite material, and when saturated have remnant magnetism induced to them. You're not going to run into that problem with these. Could this affect its operation? 55 watts? No. I think what you have is working as designed. So as long as it continues to do that, keep going.
Vernon, call sign W7VPL, is wondering about his antenna height and radials.
Radials. I always cringe when I hear the word radials. A diamond vertical antenna, BB7V, having a problem with noise and performance. Antenna ground mounted at about 3 feet with no radials. Understand it will work without radials according to the provided information. Well, if that's what it says it will do, then it's somehow an end-fed half-wave dipole. Would you recommend radials for this antenna? You can certainly lay some out because the ground does affect the antenna pattern. And would installing it higher make any difference? Yes. If it's an antenna that truly does not require radials, try getting it up 10 feet in the air. And that should really help. Well, that's what we have for this episode of Ask Dave. Thank you for all the questions. Remember, you can ask a question at hamradioanswers@gmail.com, and Trevor will collate those with other questions. We'll try to answer questions together. In the meantime, take a look at dcastler.com/support for ways of making this a viewer-supported channel. This month, I'm highlighting Patreon at patreon.com/KE0OG, which will take you to my Patreon page. What you do there is you sign up to become a patron. And if you are a patron, you can give like $1 a month, $2 a month, $10 a month, whatever works for you. And thank you very much for your support. I greatly appreciate your support. It really helps and make sure that I can get the right camera equipment, microphones, and so on, and buy some kits to build and show on the air and on videos. So thank you so much for your support. Until we next meet, 73.